Good evening, Pioneers. On behalf of the Cal State East Bay and the Cal State East Bay Alumni Association, I'd like to welcome you to the 5th of our Career Boost webinar series, Effective Interviewing Practices. My name is Travis Nelson. I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement for the university, and it is my pleasure to serve as your moderator this evening. Now, before we get started, I wanted to make sure that we let our audience know that we have disabled the chat in favor of enabling the questions and answer feature on today's webinar. In our experience, it makes it easier for us to keep track of questions being asked. So please be sure to submit your questions via the Q&A tab on the Zoom control bar. And if you would like it answered by a specific panelist, please be sure to mention that panelist's name. I already noticed that someone asked a question of our panelist Eric today via the Q&A, so you're way ahead of me on that one. In addition, I'd also be very grateful if you could upvote questions that you are interested in having answered, as that will help me when choosing what questions are asked during the end of our webinar. Per feedback from our previous events, we will be opening our chat during the last 10 minutes of the event, just in case you had any parting comments you'd like to give to our panel. So with that out of the way, I just lost my video there for a second. Sorry about that. A little nervous about that. But with that out of the way, our goal with this series of webinars is to explore what the changes in our economy means for our alumni who have experienced job loss or are currently entering a job market with fewer job opportunities available. To date, we've explored the state of recruiting. We've talked a little bit about how to be competitive. We've covered where to find jobs. And we've talked about skill building utilizing LinkedIn Learning. So today, to help us in learning more about effective interviewing practices, we are joined by 3 of our Pioneer alumni who are Career Boost veterans. All 3 of our panelists today actually volunteered their time in the past for our in-person Career Boost workshops. So to get this started, I'd like to give each of our panelists a moment to introduce themselves and answer a question that has been asked by our 2020 graduates. What was the biggest mistake you have seen a candidate make in an interview? So I'd like to invite our panelist, Anu, to kick off this round of introductions.
Hello, Pioneers. My name is Anu Dwarakanath, and I work as a senior program manager with Lam Research, which is a semiconductor manufacturing company in Fremont, headquartered in Fremont. So I graduated with an MBA in 2011. My major was general management. And today I work as a program manager handling cross-functional teams at strategic enterprise level projects. Now, coming to the question of what's the one mistake that interviewers do, what I have seen is be truthful, be it with your resume or be it with your talking. It's when you go down a path of covering up mistakes or making any or covering up your lies, you end up being very verbose about it and it will be caught. So please be truthful, whatever it is, just quote it as is.
Thank you so much, Anu, for that helpful information. I know it's they say that there's no such thing as white lies in the job search process. It will all come out in the background check. So next in the introductions, I'd like to invite Rahul. Oh, Rahul, you are still on mute.
Am I still on mute?
Now you're good.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Rahul Kuruvilla. I am the president and founder of Triune Informatics. We're an IT services company based here in Fremont. And, one of the biggest mistakes I see in interviews, since we do this fairly regularly, is that people don't know their resume inside out. When the interviewer is asking you questions, you're searching for things. And the other one is not dressing up professionally coming in for an interview. I would say those are the 2 which really stand out right when you start off.
All right, and lastly, I'd like to invite Eric.
Hello, everyone. Eric Souza. I graduated in 1995 with a business and finance degree, and then I graduated, went and got my master's at St. Mary's in 2011. Currently, I am a senior fixed income portfolio manager at SVB Asset Management, which is part of Silicon Valley Bank. But I've been managing and trading fixed income portfolios all here in the Bay Area for close to 25 years now. And I was really happy when I saw that this first question about the biggest mistake, because a lot of times in these panels, I kick off with a very, keep a very quick story, which led me to really kind of going down this path with helping students, in that I was interviewing for a junior fixed income trader to work for me. And again, I'm pointing out the junior fixed income title specifically because this was key in the interviewing process. I asked a candidate, who was a junior candidate, tell me what you want to do. And, this person just kind of rambled on about investment banking, mergers and acquisitions, equities, and never mentioned the words bonds, fixed income, or trading. And so I let him ramble for a few minutes, and I stopped him during the interview, and I told him, I said, here, let me give you some advice on interviewing. And he went completely pale. I mean, I think he looked like he was about to vomit. And the reason I stopped him is because, I told him why. And, the biggest takeaway was, when you're interviewing for a job, you want to convey to that prospective employer that you're passionate about this job in this industry, and this is what you want to do. Even though it may be you're interested in other things, I think one of the key things to getting a job is really conveying that passion and that drive and that interest in the job you're applying for.
So excellent advice of what not to do starting out. And I want to thank all of you so much for agreeing to participate this evening. I'm really grateful that you're taking the time to spend it with the Pioneer community tonight. And now that we started off with examples of what not to replicate, I'd like to flip the script and start to talk about what our Pioneer alumni should do after they've received that phone call or email inviting them to an interview, and they've accepted the invite. So kicking this off with Anu, what should our alumni do in between accepting the interview and the actual interview themselves? How should they prepare themselves?
So I would start with the job profile or the job description to which you applied, right? First, start with reading this in and out. As an interviewer, as an interviewer, not an interview, but as an interviewer, if I'm interviewing you, that's what I will hold as well. So start with the job profile, read it in and out. First thing is identify which one you are familiar with. Like, I believe today we have a mixed group here, like some are probably looking for a job in the same experience that you have, and some may be looking for a change. Different people, right? So some of the skills might be familiar to you and some may not be. So first identify that, which one if I'm a program manager, if I see concepts related to stakeholder management, risk management, I'm very familiar with that. But if I see something related to core technology, maybe not so familiar. So once I know which I'm not familiar with, I think we need to prepare for that. And preparation doesn't mean if we don't have experience, we can at least get familiar with the terms. And for that, you have Google, you have LinkedIn Learning, use that, get familiar with what these tools are, what are those key terms in those things that you don't know. And for things that you identify, say, for example, stakeholder management, risk management, put yourself in that position as to, okay, in this role, what is it that I would do? And if you have done something like that in the past, it will always help to go back to the presentations maybe you had done, or the kind of documentation, the work that you had, if you have access to it. Look back, sometimes if you've been in a role for a long time, you may forget over time, what was it that you worked on? What were some of the issues you encountered and how you resolved it? Maybe you didn't resolve it the right way then, but now you know how to resolve it. So that's some of the lessons learned. And lastly, don't forget doing your own research on Google, right? If you're looking for senior program managers, just go to Google and just type typical interview questions, and also some particular terms that needs to be known for that role, and start from there.
So this sounds very similar to studying for a test in many ways. You have a pretty good idea of what the content that is going to be covered. You know exactly what it is. And even if you don't know the exact questions that are going to be asked. So that being said, in both my understanding and personal experience, there will always be some number of behavioral-based questions. I know that this evening when we were pulling all the questions that were submitted in advance from our audience, you saw that pop up time and time again. We had almost 200 advanced questions submitted. So I'd like to turn to Eric to give us some more information about these. So Eric, what are behavioral questions? What is an interviewer trying to get by asking them? And can you give us some examples of questions that might be asked?
Yes, think of behavioral questions as more as they're trying to how you handled a certain situation. Examples are, tell me about a challenging situation. How do you work well under pressure? They're not asking about specific skills or accomplishments that you have. They want to see how you worked. And probably the most fearful of these is tell me when you made a mistake or when you failed at something. The interview, they're less concerned about your failure, but more importantly, how did you respond, right? And I think there's three key things to think about. Did you take ownership of this mistake, right? Did you blame others? Whether you just made excuses on things? The second is, what did you learn? Did you learn a valuable lesson? Did you grow from that say failure or mistake? And the third thing is, say, how did you recover? How did you address the issue? What was your outcome? I think those are really the key things of what they're trying to get out. They're not trying to find out that you've made a mistake, or again, one of the most fearful ones also always is when you talk about strength and weaknesses. And the thing is, don't give an actual weakness. That's like the first thing. But also you don't want to say, well, I just work too hard. That's one of my weaknesses. So you have to find this balance, and I think examples of that is, maybe talking about something you don't have experience with. Maybe you have, one area for improvement for me is this. And what I've done is I've tried to, learn about this by taking classes or whatever it might be. Those are things that are not necessarily a negative weakness, but again, not something that you can really want to point out to the prospective interviewer a true weakness. So so hopefully that was the biggest takeaway, and really the biggest thing, and very much very similar to what Anu was mentioning. It's all about preparing. These are not questions that you can come on the fly. It's not going to be answers that you can respond to what you've done. You have to go through examples. And there is one, there's a person they're on YouTube a lot. His name is Andrew Lasivita. It's Civita. He has great free YouTube videos all about how to prepare for those type of behavioral questions. So I'd highly recommend.
Thank you so much for sharing that resource. I remember when I was in my old role, I sat across an interview one day that was between a prospective employer of a student, and he had said that lots of times when he's looking for the answers to these interview questions, especially when it comes to the failure question, he was looking for the use of I when it came to failure and the use of we when it came to team aspect. Of if you accepted your own role within the failure and gave credit to the aspect of the team. So it's really interesting how things like that play into the interview process. So pivoting here a little bit. So Rahul, I'd like to turn to you for some input about technical aptitude. And that's because you work in the realm of IT staffing and consulting. So in my previous role with the university, there was this assumption by students in more technical fields, like data analytics, for example, or computer science, that the interview process was going to be more about testing the candidate's technical skills and knowledge than behavioral based. So I just want to turn to you to find out, is there truth to that assumption? And if so, what level of technical questioning might candidates expect when interviewing for both technical and non-technical roles?
Well, I think it's a good question, because the fact that, there's this assumption that, the technical skills is which will get you the job, which is absolutely true to some extent, because, if I go for a job interview and it's a highly technical position, if I don't know the subject matter, I'm not going to be able to get the job. But it's foolish to think that that's the only way. Unless the job you're interviewing is one where they'll interview you, hire you, lock you up in a room and throw the key out, you're going to be working with people. And so how well you work with other people is actually as important as what you bring to the table. So let me put it in like, actual terms. I would say 60 to 70% is pure technical skills. When they interview you for a job, we do that. Like, I run a IT staffing consulting company, which Travis said. And one of the first things we do when we interview candidates for contract positions or full-time is we do a thorough technical assessment. We might have them come and whiteboard. Clients do exactly the same things. They will ask you to come and whiteboard and talk to them about, the things which they've asked for you and what you have on your resume. So it's very important that your resume is actually true. I say, back in the day, people used to embellish a little bit. Now they've started fabricating. So it's that fine line. You've got to be very clear. I recommend to everybody who works on their resume is put things on your resume which you have personally worked on and which you can back up. Do not put something which you happen to be in a conversation or you happen to be on a larger team where you got to hear about it. Because the problem which happens is 8 or 9 times you will be asked about that one little thing which you wrote on your resume which you can't back up. So the technical part is absolutely important, but 30% about it is what you bring to the team. How are you as a team player? Because at the end of the day, all of us are social people. I want a team player who I can talk to and, collectively solve issues. So maybe for one or contracting roles, they might take you purely for a technical reason without you having any social skills. But I think 9 out of 10, you have to have that mix. It's 70-30. You've got to come in with the right attitude and with the right mindset when you come in for a job.
Thank you so much. I love that aspect of emphasizing that we're social creatures, and that has a lot to do with team dynamics inside of a work environment. So with that, our attendees know what to prep for at this point. So they know that there's that mix of behavioral but technical based questions that might be involved. They know to study up on the position to build their skills. But Eric, I'd like to turn to you to walk us through the actual day of the interview, which, we've had a lot of questions about, how do what do I do the day of the interview? So what, if anything, should the candidate make sure to do the day of the interview? And are there any tips that you would recommend they follow during the interview?
I probably focus more on what you're going to do during the interview, because I think that's more of the key thing. And a lot of it is, you'll be surprised why I'm saying this, but, as a person who's interviewed quite a few, number of people over the past 20 years, you get an idea. And it's little things during the interview, smiling, shaking hands, introducing yourself, sitting upright, making eye contact, and, keeping hand gestures to a minimum, as I'm always talking with my hands. I'm one that, I have to try and do that. So it's those things that are the little things during the interview that you want to make sure that you're doing. Besides, talking about your resume and your experience and all those other behavioral questions that will be coming up. Those are little things that you can definitely, you have 100% control of. And then also, this is something that I definitely highly recommend, and there's not a lot of people who still do it, is after the interview, again, thank you for the person for their time and opportunity and pleasure and meeting them and all that, but send them a thank you email. You don't be surprised that, we're currently interviewing for somebody, for a role, and there was a couple candidates who just didn't send anything. And then there was one candidate that did, and I know a lot of my colleagues were like, they just very much enjoyed that, and it's not like they wrote a book. It was just a quick 2 or 3 sentence email. So that would be, as far as after the interview, definitely following up with everybody you interviewed with, and again, reiterating, thanking them for the time, and just that little detail goes a long way. And just a lot of times, I think it's just where, I'm from the old school, you definitely always did that, and I'm starting to see that it's not something you're seeing all the time now. So.
Yeah, I was on, and this is, of course, a given, I feel, to quite a few people. I was on LinkedIn the other day, and a random, second level connection post popped up, and it said, showed up an hour early for my interview. I need to use the restroom now, but I'm too scared to go in. an hour early to ask them to use their restroom. So it's one of those things too that I just want to throw out there is making sure you show up on early, but there is such a thing as too early, because you might find yourself in that awkward situation.
And it comes down to also being prepared, right? For me, if I was interviewing, I'd want to know exactly where do I have to be, where is there parking, what is around there. For example, if you get there early, is there somewhere you want to grab some food? I mean, if you, anything that you do, the more you're prepared, the more successful you're going to be at it. So if you just wing it and go through, I can tell when a candidate walks in, I can tell the candidate who was prepared for this interview, who's ready to go and had their stuff, thought out. And I can definitely tell the interviewer, the candidate who is just winging it. And, and in my mind, I know exactly those are two types of workers, right? I want the worker who's prepared and ready to come and has the answers. I don't want the candidate who just ran and is running in and is pouring sweat and is asking for all these other things. That's just it's not a good way to kick off. Now, again, I understand there are things that happen. Completely understand. We're all human. We all have those things, but it's all about being prepared.
Absolutely. Truer words have never been spoken. So, of course, now we're in a totally different type of situation. So one of the downsides, or some might even say benefits, of the changes that organizations have had to make because of COVID-19 is an increase in video interviewing, as well as the use of computer-based interview platforms that record a candidate's response to questions in advance of an official interview. So, Rahul, I'd like to turn to you for these questions. Is there anything different from what Eric gave in his response when it comes to tips on video interviews? And how about those computer-based interviewing platforms? What in your experience has been the use of those, if any?
Well, I think, what Eric said is absolutely apt. And to add on to some of the things which Eric said is, even though interviews have come onto the video right now, like you do Zoom and Skype, what the timeliness is something which is still appreciated. So for a meeting which you're having on, being a video interview, make sure you download the associated software to run the interview much prior to the interview. Do not wait for the last minute to do it, because you don't want to say you had a technical issue going in and being late for it. You want to be in the waiting room 2 minutes early, because most of these platforms have a waiting room right now where they will let you come in. And that's number one. The next thing is be professional. There's a very common thing. You can never be too overdressed for an interview, because the worst they'll assume is he came out well dressed. The other way around is not as good. So be professionally well dressed. I also would recommend, if you notice, all of us on this panel today, we all have some form of virtual background. In fact, Eric's actually done a really good background at the back. The reason for doing that is a courtesy to the person in front of you. If I have things at the back which are distracting, it takes away from the interview and the time. So these are some of these plain, simple things which I can say. With regards to, the computer-based interviews, they can be unnerving. I've had really good candidates who have come and said, hey, I don't like that thing. Typically what happens in a candidate, computer-based interview is you will get into a room, it'll give you a question, it'll give you about 15 seconds to process. And then you are supposed to give a response in between 30 seconds to 60 seconds. It'll time you. And you're speaking to a blank screen. So it takes a little bit of practice. But, the plus side to it, the way I look at it is you don't have a person on the other end who is giving you feedback. So sometimes when you're talking, when you get the other person's feedback, either he's excited or he looks bored. It changes the way you take the questions. So what I would say is take it as a positive. This is your time to talk about what you know well and what you have done. So computer-based interviews, you've got to go in with the mindset that, hey, I am talking to another person. It's just a person who has shut off his video. If you take that approach to it, I think you'll be successful. But this is going to be the new norm. We have to get used to it. And hopefully some of this, information will get you much prepared.
Yeah, very great advice. People have laughed in the past when I told them that I actually put two googly eyes above my webcam. But it's one of those things where it almost makes me feel like I'm connecting with a person when I look directly at the camera now. I'm looking in the eyes. So that's a really helpful tip for those that are being recorded. So as I mentioned earlier, we had a lot of questions submitted for this particular round. We're getting a lot of questions in the Q&A portion. But as we saw when looking at the questions being submitted to our panelists and exploring exactly where today's conversation was going to go, a lot of the submissions that we received were specific questions asked during the interview So, for example, what are some of your weaknesses? Or tell us about a time you failed in some way and what did you do about it? Now some of these, some were covered in the previous answer to the behavioral-based questions, but inevitably, when you are feeling the pressure of sitting across from a decision maker, you might have an answer go right out of your head, or even be asked a question that you're not sure how to answer. So I'd really like to open this to all of you, beginning with Anu. So in that moment that I just outlined, where you just had an answer that just flew right out of your head, how do you suggest that our attendees overcome that fear or anxiety of not saying the right thing or not answering a question fully? And are there any tips that you would suggest our alumni follow to ensure that they answer a question fully?
So firstly, don't jump off to answer any question. It's always advisable to take about 10 to 30 seconds to think about it. And in my opinion, it's not wrong. It comes across as somebody who thinks before they think and act, right? Thinks before you act. So that will at least give you some time to consolidate your thoughts. And second, before you walk into the interview, as I told you, I always look at the job profile and look at the interview, look at the resume. Those are the two key things. And if I'm interviewing a candidate, I'm looking at, okay, how well this person, if I bring him or her to my group tomorrow, is it possible for this person to just take the job and run it, right? That's what I'm saying, how much you fit into that role. And that's exactly what I think you should kind of think the interviewer is asking you. In your situation, can you, like, for example, to give from my own personal experience, I'll give you. When I was interviewing an intern once, we were interviewing her for a project coordinator role. And she had no experience in a company, but more like in her college with academic, I think, running the student groups. But there was something that, we picked on. We wanted to know how well she worked with the people, how, like, when she would come into this role, she had to coordinate with the larger team, like what Eric and Rahul have already alluded to, right? Working with people is very important. The social skills are what we're looking at. So she was heading this one little student group, and all we wanted to know is it was a food drive, but we wanted to know, okay, how you communicated with them. Did you give them written communication, verbal? And those are the skills that we take through, right? So don't look for the perfect answer first. And second, try to see how you can try to understand the interviewer's question a little bit as to what is it that they're trying to get out of it. If they're asking your leadership skills, in their mind, they're thinking, okay, how well will she work with the team, with the people? And at the end of the day, in case you mess up also, just take a step back and talk again. It's the positive attitude and it's the right mindset that I think all of us will like.
And Rahul, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
No, I think Anu's got it well covered. The only thing I would say maybe is, be authentic, be yourself. If I really look at this, right, the people on the other end of it, when you go for an interview, there's anxiety on both sides. Even when we do this panel today, you might think, hey, these are folks who are coming here to be the panelists, so they must be all confident and comfortable. There's anxiety with us. We're wondering how are we being received? Are we making sense? Is this useful? Or, did 10 people drop off after my last response? So the thing is, anxiety is very normal. And I think it's just, the thing to realize is the interviewer has been in your spot and he's a human being just like you. Same anxiety, same everything. So if you're authentic and you convey what you've come, the very fact that you've got the interview means that the person on the other end thinks that you're capable and suitable for this job. So you already have an in. Now is your opportunity to give them the reason to hire you. And I'm going to always hire somebody who comes with skills, but also looks like the person I want to have on my team. So I think keep that in mind. You want to be friends with people who connect with you. So that thing doesn't go out when we interview people. So, I'll take Anu's advice where you take that 15, 20 seconds, sit back, absorb the question, then answer the question. And preparation. You got to prepare and go in for the interview. I think I was just looking at it, I was trying to come up with something, nice to tell everybody. And I was thinking about, when you think of Martin Luther King's speech about, I have a dream, he practiced. He didn't just on the fly, in 2 seconds, it's not, it came. And it just became such a beautiful thing for all of us to. So practice, there are tough questions which are being asked. What are your weaknesses? Tell me a tough situation. Think about it, come up with an authentic thing, but practice it, right? This is a question which is coming. So I would say, practice, but be authentic. Find that balance between it.
Great advice. And Eric, would you like to add anything?
No, I mean, I think those are great, both great answers. I think the only thing maybe to add is similar to what, about how we've talked about being prepared, and thinking about these questions beforehand. The interesting thing about when you're talking about maybe a behavioral type of question, you really are going to almost kind of be telling a story, right? If you're talking about one of your weaknesses or things like along those lines, or you're getting that difficult question. A lot of times what may help is kind of telling a story or an example. So maybe having that preparedness of that beforehand. And again, I think that just goes into thinking of some of these questions, and Anu brought these up. There's a lot of data that's out there as far as examples of these type of questions that will be asked. But also just remember that the interviewer, well, some are, but the interviews, they're not trying to stump you, right? They're not trying to trick you up. The goal is they're trying to find out what kind of candidate you are. What kind of work ethic do you have? You're sitting there in the room already because your resume told them that you have at least the basic skills to get you into the door. Now it's okay, we got all these people who have the skills. What type of person is this? What type of work ethic do they have? Those are the things you want to be prepared for. So think about how to convey that, and almost think of it as an elevator pitch. Here, as I'm rambling on, the last thing you want to do is ramble on, right? Have your elevator pitch, have your answers quick, and to the point, and yeah, that would be my answer.
Perfect. So following that similar thread, there's a question I want to pose to all three of you, and this was asked in some of the Q&A from today, and I'm going to frame this in a scenario. So, you're the candidate, you just wrap up what you think is going to be the last question of the interview, but then they ask you one more, and that's the question, do you have any questions for us? How do you respond? And are there any questions that should be off limits? So I'd like to start these answers with Rahul.
So this is one of those, everyone thinks it's a trick question, but honestly, when we hire for our company, and, I had a recent conversation with a really good friend of mine who's also a client hiring manager. And he gave me an example. He said that, the reason for asking, do you have any questions for us, is to see how much homework and research you've done about the company. And also, what is your mindset coming into this job? So, recent example, a gentleman went in for an interview, did a very good job. He was technically very sound. Last question they asked him is, do you have any questions for us? He said, if I'm selected, when will I start? Yeah, fair question. But if that was the first question of many, it would have been really good. But what he did was he just finished at that. So the problem the manager was thinking was, he's only bothered about when will I start? What about questions like, what are my career progressions? What is the team composed of? When I join, what will be my onboarding? How do I get up to speed? Just basic questions. Like, I'm not encouraging you to ask questions like, which cube will I sit in? Am I going to get a shiny new laptop and stuff like that? Be considerate, be thoughtful, but at the same time, ask questions which are relevant, right? You're going to be working, tell them, hey, if you're traveling from, San Ramon and working in San Jose, you got rush hour traffic. ask them, what's the expectation of time? What time does everybody typically get in? Those are the things which I think show interest. And, you want to hire people who are going to be with you for the long haul. If somebody asks you all these questions, I'm thinking, hey, they're thinking about me as a potential career opportunity rather than a job. So I would say, use this opportunity to ask the employer, hey, how do I fit in with your larger scheme? And that's my 2 cents on this one.
Oh, sorry, had to unmute myself. So perfect answer. And I'd like to turn it over to Eric to add.
Yeah, I love this question because it is something that not a lot of people do and maybe ask just questions that just to end the interview. So I have kind of three related, three types of questions. Company related questions. You want to have maybe questions for your boss who you're interviewing, and then maybe questions for your peers and other people in different groups that sometimes interview. And definitely, I couldn't agree more with what Rahul was saying about knowing the company. I would, I think, and how you could kind of sneak that in is, you want to ask questions about, maybe the direction of the company or products and certain products or expansions. Or, I think if you want to blow somebody away in an interview saying, hey, I was reviewing your 10K, or I was reading on your website that blah, blah, blah. I mean, that would show you've done the research that you're really going into rather than just some standard interview questions that you read off of Google. So that would be something that's really good to kind of focus on. For your boss, when you're interviewing your boss, I definitely want you want to ask questions to them about what is their management style. One question I had that I think is a great question to ask a potential boss is, in a year from now, what would success look like to you, right? Specifically, what will I have accomplished that you would consider me to be a success? So I think those are questions that we don't really answer to prospective employees, bosses. And then for the peers and other questions, ask people like, what do they like about the organization? What brought them to the company? And more importantly, what kept them there, right? These are probably employees that have been around for 3, 5 years, 7 years. They're bringing them in maybe from a different group. Ask them about things like that. So the answer is, do you have questions? Yes, there's always, you always want to have questions. But I wouldn't just think, okay, these are the 3 questions I want to ask every single person. Cater your questions to the type of person that you're interviewing. But again, make sure that these questions aren't non-aggressive or in a sense of, hey, I heard you had I seen you had crappy earnings last quarter. What happened? Stay away from that. Right? You want to be positive type of questions. So.
Yeah, great input. And I'd like to share with our audience as well that if you are on the Q&A tab, you can select between the questions that have yet to be answered and those that have been answered. And Eric did provide several examples to an answered question. So I definitely check that out. And then I'd like to invite Anu to add if there's anything that you'd like to add.
Yeah, like Eric said, this is my fun part of an interview, more like when I'm a candidate, right? I get to understand more about the company, about the job. So one of our core values, our company's core values, they say think customer, company, individual. And I would ask questions in the same manner. So first, customer is, where is your business headed? And of course, you should have done your homework as well. But it's a good question to ask, where are you headed? Are you not in that way, but I'm just giving you ideas. Are you expanding globally? What's the vision for a certain product? So that talks about the customer itself. And then on the company, it's very important. If I were you, I would want to know 2 things, right? Mainly, one is, what's the culture of the company? Every company has their own culture, and it's best to hear that from their own employees. And that kind of builds into the management style. If a certain management style goes with certain culture, so what it is like. And then the third is, you come to your individual. And when I come to individual, for me, it's very important that what Rahul said, this is not just a job, right? When you get into it, thinking you would look at it as a career, not just a job. So you want to know how I will go from this point to a certain other point. How will the company help me grow, help me build my career, or are they just looking at hiring a person for a job? what do they have? Do they have some career succession plans? Generally, how does that work in the company? And then I think after these, you could come to some personal questions like work from homes or when do I start, whatever. That's very, very personal to your job and your situation.
Thank you so much. So I know we had one more structured question to get to, but I definitely want to make sure that we have enough time to answer some of the questions that have been asked during this live event. So we're going to skip the last structured question and move on to the Q&A portion. So, thank you all so much for your insights. We have quite a few questions here, and I know that we started about 3 minutes late, so we have a little bit of extra time afterwards for those of you who can stick around from the audience. But one of the questions on the Q&A that I believe is particularly important to ask for the panel, and this is coming from the same person, is what do you suggest for individuals with autism spectrum disorder for when they are fully capable of succeeding in the position, but they struggle with social norms, so such as shaking hands, making eye contact, or smiling? Do you have any suggestions for them? And how or when should a candidate mention a disability? And if any of you would like to tackle this, feel free to just put up your hand and I'll call out in order. All right, Rahul.
Well, we do some work with students with disability. And I think as part of that program, we've actually taken students from Cal State to our partners at Workday. And we've tried to do something called a job share day, which allows students to have the opportunity to do mock interviews. And what I would, encourage you when you're talking and going for interviews is practice. It's the same thing with all of the other things which we said. But in order to succeed, if you think that, you have, how do I say, struggling with shaking hands, making eye contact, and or smiling, if the person on the other end is aware, he will be much more receptive towards that. But I'll also say that, with practice comes certain advantages. One of the things we learned when we were doing the workshops at Workday was we had these mock interviews and they said, why did you apply for this job? And one of the students, and this is not something which is really relevant for folks who have autism. Sometimes if you speak honestly, you say, hey, I applied for this job because this job is 5 minutes away from my house. Absolutely the right answer. But maybe it needs to come at the very end. You need to talk about all of the other reasons why you applied for the job and not just the geographical reason. So I think it's a matter of how do you, get the message across. But there is a lot of employers who have programs where they are open to getting people from the disability spectrum, folks from a minority background, folks who are underrepresented. So I think some of these things which, used to be underrepresented can also be used as a strength to tell employers that I do come with these challenges sometimes, which can be overcome because I bring these other skills, which might be very relevant for this job.
Yeah, the Workday example is a great example because of how much work they do with their employee groups, employee belongingness committees. So they have committees that are all about diversity, ability. Strong companies like that, they really actively support a lot of their employees, and that could be part of the process of that answer of why did you apply to work here? Well, I see that this workplace culture is very supportive of people like myself, for example. Would anybody else like to add anything to that answer? No? All right. So the next question that we have that was submitted, and I'm going to lump this with another one as well. I keep doing the lumping, but I think it's a little bit more efficient. Is it okay to rephrase a question before answering it during an interview? And is it okay to write down notes before you answer a question? Should you do it when they are asking the question or after? Who would like to have first stab at that one? All right, I knew I saw your hand first, followed by Eric.
So for the first, I think I did answer as well. Rephrasing the question, Definitely yes, but it depends on the kind of question asked. Generally, rephrasing works when it is for situational questions. If it's a straight open-ended question, there's no point rephrasing it, right? It's understood that you understand the question, but something like they run you through a certain scenario and they ask you how would you react is when are you saying this? You can paraphrase, and that will help you buy some more time to rethink while you're repeating that question. And writing down notes again, you need to maintain that eye contact, and sometimes visual cues are very important to see how you're progressing. So hold that eye contact until the question is done. And after that, while you're thinking, you can jot down some notes.
Perfect. And Eric, would you like to add?
Yeah, the only thing to add there is definitely what I agreed 100% with what Anu was saying about eye contact. Even when you're taking notes, I would practice on, because you're not writing a full paragraph, right? You're not writing a dissertation. You're just writing down just notes. Practice just writing notes without without removing that eye contact. That's key. So that would be my thing, is try to. I mean, there's going to be times where you have to, but just think of it as to be focused on eye contact always.
Perfect. And before we move to the next question, I'd like to invite any of our attendees to please submit your questions via the Q&A tab. We do have about 10 more minutes left or so before we'll go into the wrap up. So this is a good time to get your questions asked. The next question that I am actually going to turn to was a question that was submitted in advance, and per agreement of our panelists, they assigned Rahul to tackle this one. So that question is, how do you answer that question about salary expectations?
Well, it's an interesting thing, right? Salary expectation. But let me give you a small analogy, and it might get you all thinking a little bit. If I were to tell you that, most of us, say start our career in the mid-20s, and say you work, say 30, 35 years. And you have two people, let's just take, for example, one person starts off at 100K. That's a salary which was offered by the employer. And the other person, exact same skills, qualification, but he went and negotiated and got a salary of 107K. You'll be surprised to hear, and they both have a exactly similar career trajectory, same amount of raises, promotions, and they both retire at about 35 years from now. Power of compounding interest and all of that. The person who is at 107, who started at 107, and the person at 100, the person at 100 essentially is technically like not working 7 years of your life. So that's the difference which comes. It's you can actually look it up. There's a study on it. And that's why I think, one of the things with salary negotiation is be smart about it, but also don't be shy about asking. Because too often, I'll tell you right off the bat, I came out of college, Cal State East Bay, 2001, master's in computer science, and I got a job with PeopleSoft. Back in the day, they gave me a job for, that time I started off at 57K. The minute the job offer came, I couldn't have been faster to sign it and mail it back. I was like, let me sign it, put it back, because they'll take back my offer. The reason they've given you a job is because they think you're good. I'm not saying use it, because every job has a certain salary range. And the thing is, if you don't ask, you'll never know. Maybe you could have gotten a couple of $1,000s more. It's not for the fact that you need to negotiate and bargain for everything, because certain jobs, I cannot pay more than this. This is where it is. But I think, it also shows confidence in your skills. Because if you don't believe in yourself, how is the other person going to believe you? And I think it goes through your career. I would always recommend, even if you find that in a particular year, right now is a tough time, both as an employer and an employee, be aware of the situations and the surroundings. There's a tough market to go and ask somebody for a salary hike. But I would still ask for a performance review, because it validates what you're doing from a career standpoint. It also lets you know where my career is heading. And two things I always say, if I could, is if you can find your job is neither giving you career progression, nor is it paying you terribly well, you need to find something else. You probably need to retool and get something else. But that's my quick thing on salary negotiation. But hopefully that helps.
Definitely. And it's actually a perfect pitch for our next Career Boost webinar that will be happening in 2 weeks from today, which is on salary expectations and negotiation, which we'll be inviting you back to participate in that one. So if any of our attendees would like to get more information on that, definitely make sure you sign up for that next webinar. Looking more at our questions here, there's one specifically for you, Eric, that I'll throw your way. So what do you look for in a candidate in a high-pressured environment, such as in banking or trading floor? How does one balance mental health? I think that this applies across many fields, right? So not just in finance, but you may think about like health fields, for example, or nurses are probably working in some very high-pressure, high-stress environments.
Yeah, it seems like almost kind of two different questions, what I'm looking for. And I think I've preached this in every type of seminar like this is just, I hire for passion, right? I hire, that's what I look for when I'm hiring. I don't really care what what school you went to, what your GPA was, that type of thing. I'm hiring for a work ethic. I'm hiring for passion and interest. So trying to convey that, and it may seem, that may seem just logical that, why, of course I would want to convey that. You'd be surprised how many people do not convey that. So that's one thing that I'm focusing on. As far as, fast, from a mental health perspective, you definitely have to be prepared, for, if you're going to be going into an industry or a job that has high stress and hopefully you are kind of well aware of that, and just be prepared that everyone pays their dues. So, have that in the back of your mind, especially from an entry-level perspective, that you're going to have maybe some longer days. You're going to have to take orders from somebody. Realize that it's temporary, right? Nobody that I know is successful just jump right into the best career upward trajectory without paying their dues or doing hard work. So if you kind of come in prepared for that, it definitely helps, helps the blow from a mental health perspective.
Thank you. And so turning back to who would like to answer this one first, feel free to just raise your hand. So what do you suggest when you are asked about a task that you've never done? Should you say that you don't have experience, but are a fast and diligent employee and will learn it?
I have one example, and I've been asked this too by candidates, is a lot of times, especially on a resume or a job you've done, don't be afraid that if there's say one task that you've done that's kind of somewhat similar and it's a very small portion of what you do, it's still experience, right? So, I think you don't want to paint the picture that you're an expert, and this is what, Rahul was mentioning earlier. Don't hide behind and don't fake it. You want to be upfront with what experience you have and what you don't have. But you'd be surprised that, and I've seen this in resumes where I've helped people, that they're looking at a job description and they're looking at the resume and they're just like, I don't really have much relevant experience. And after asking them questions about different tasks or projects they worked on, they actually have some relevant experience that can be catered towards that job description. So I think it comes down to, don't be afraid that the only way you can do something or apply for a role is if it was 90% of what you did on a daily basis. If you worked on one particular project or one particular thing, especially when you're doing entry level, especially when you're coming from an internship, don't be afraid to say, well, okay, I haven't really done a lot of experience, but here's an example of what I did that's somewhat similar. That's how you kind of, I would paint that picture, kind of tell that story, as opposed to just saying, no, I've never done that experience. Because I'm sure there's something you've done that's somewhat relevant. And this really gets back to being prepared. Everything that you've done, and really, I can't, agree more with what Anu was saying about knowing the job descriptions, knowing the skills and what you've done, and just, being prepared from that perspective. Couldn't agree more on that. So.
And to add to that, I have been in a similar position, not during interviewing, but even after you get to the company, you change roles. And I have been put in roles where clearly I was told you don't have the skills. And a year later, I was told you were a sponge and you picked up skills. So it's really, and sometimes you might really apply to get that challenge, right? We learn a lot on the job. I think what we need to prove is add to Eric's point. We did it in the past, and I'm deliberately doing it because I'm passionate to do this and passionate to learn. And I am a quick learner. I can do it. I think that's what one needs to demonstrate if they're lacking in that skill.
Yeah, it comes down to that passion that Eric was talking about earlier. So we have time to answer one more question as a group, and then we're going to transition to the closing segment. But I'd like to invite our panelists, once we go through the closing, since we do have a lot of questions that are open, if you feel like sticking around and typing out an answer to some of these, I'm sure that our attendees would greatly appreciate that. So the last question here, and this is just because we had a lot of these questions submitted in advance, is relating to students who have time gap in work. If you're asked that in an interview to explain the time gap that may be on your resume, how do you explain that? I know it's going to be interesting because it's a case-by-case scenario, right?
Yeah.
But some basic structure may help.
I'd be upfront. I've helped with folks with resumes on that as far as what they should do. And some of them, it's usually health reasons or taking care of somebody. I would be upfront about it. I mean, I think it's definitely something that you don't want to hide. Don't be shy and don't think that it's bad. Absolutely not. I would be upfront and passionate about it and convey that, hey, this is what has happened. Now, granted, if you were out backpacking and partying in Europe, then sorry, you're not gonna be able to lie through it. But you got to own it, right? There's only one person looking out for your career, and that's you. So you got to make sure that you are thinking about that going forward. And so you want to, all those things that you've done in your career, whether you took time away to help somebody or you were not healthy or whatever it might be, just own it, right? Convey it, put it on the resume. I'm fine with seeing that in there. Don't hide away from it just because. Believe me, as a person who goes through resumes, that's the first thing I see is when somebody tries to hide it. Okay, what happened? Now, if it's 1 year, maybe I'll ask them in an interview. If it's a big gap, I know something happened. So I'm curious, what happened? Where were you? What did you do? Why isn't it there? That's what I would say is just put it there, own it, and be comfortable with it.
Yeah, I was about to ask, what is the gap for, right? And that's what I think Eric was referring to. It's understanding the nature of the gap rather than the gap itself.
Yeah.
Like I took a gap of 2 years to pursue my master's. And then I know a friend who took a gap because he wanted to try restaurants and it didn't work out. And then he came back to a job. So I think it's okay. But as far as you're truthful and honest to what it is, that should explain it.
And Rahul, I saw you put your hand up too.
No, I think it's similar to what Eric and Anu said. It's, you have to be, I would absolutely call it a resume because like Eric said, that's the first thing you notice. When you see, everything is orderly going March 2005 through April 2015, I have something. And then you see a 2-year gap, nothing there. So it leads me to wonder, whenever I see information which can't be explained, you always have things you're wondering, right? And you don't want the person on the other end to assume something. So put it out there. And I'll be very frank, the number one thing which we see with a lot of folks who apply for jobs is health. Second is maternity. So sometimes people take a gap for 2-3 years because for the first 3 years, they want to be with their children. And I think it's admirable when they do that. And I think it's not it's not something where I think you have to explain it, but put it on this thing. I wanted to take 3 years to be the best mother or best father possible. So do that. But when you come back, talk about it. And then, for the first job, say, I didn't just forget 15 years of my experience just because it took 3 years off. So I think you got to own it and be confident about it. But, at the same time, I think, give them a reason. While you were out on the break, I kept myself abreast of some of the latest things which were happening. I've been coding on the side. I've got a beautiful website which I've created. So maybe give context to it, give color to it. So take it head on. Don't wait for them to ask you a question. Be upfront about it.
Yeah, you spot on, Rahul. I was about to, when you were talking, I was thinking about moms, right? I'm a mom of 2 kids and I didn't take a break, but I know many people took a break either in the very early years or up until the kids went to kindergarten. Nothing wrong with that. And I don't know if in the audience we have any returning moms. Absolutely no. I don't see an issue if anybody comes to me and says that as far as you can prove you're still the right person to prove the job, I don't think that break should matter in any way.
Yeah, I saw something creative on a resume I reviewed recently, and it was a new C-level position that I'd never heard about, and was chief homemaker. And the mother who did it, she actually, underneath that title, she put every little thing. She almost did translatable skills, right? With having to take care of a family and build a home. And it was so well presented, and it was the first time I ever saw it, but it was so creative. You know, you had to give credit in seeing that. So with that last question finished, you know, I want to be conscious of everybody's time. We're actually past the 3 minutes of the overlap from when we started. So I want to thank our panelists, Anu, Rahul, and Eric, for spending this time helping our Pioneer alumni community navigate some of the interview anxiety they might have. I'd like to give each of you a quick 30 seconds to close with any important advice that you have for our Pioneer community. And I'd like to start with Anu.
So I'm on LinkedIn. Travis could probably be sending my LinkedIn profile. So please connect with me if there is anything I can help out in terms of jobs, in terms of your resume. Not salary negotiation is not one of my skills. So that's why we only nominated Rahul. But any other things, if I can be helpful I'll be happy to help you.
And then moving on to Rahul.
We're really wishing you all the best. Like, I mean, hopefully this is going to sharpen your interviewing skills. You get some ideas on what to do. And I wish you all the best as you interview for jobs, and hopefully you get jobs. But I think the one thing, remember, don't give up if you don't get the first one, and don't get the second one, because there is a job which is waiting there for you, which you might not realize is the perfect job for you. So hang in there. It's going to be a tough market, but I think this will pass through. So hopefully this was useful. But like Anu said, we all are available on LinkedIn. Please connect if we can be of any help. I've had personally a lot of people who helped me all through my career. So if I can, you know, help anybody out, it'll be my pleasure. So good luck and best wishes.
Yep. Before we close with Eric, I do want to mention that all the links have been shared in the chat. The chat has also been open to the attendees right now. So, you know, if you have any parting messages to our panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat at this point. And then finally, to close this out, I'd like to turn to Eric.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that please feel free to use me as a resource. I 100% believe in karma. And, you know, I definitely want to do right by this, you know, the Cal State East Bay. You know, whether you're a current student or an alumni, I want to be here to help. At the same time, you know, it's just as Rahul was saying, don't give up. You know, I think everybody who's attending this is doing the right thing. It's all about preparing. And, you know, feel free to reach out. I want to be a resource. I want to help. Don't feel that just as this is ending, that this is it. We're definitely here to help you get that job. And, you know, last thing I would just say is just that everybody asks about how do you get a job, right? And besides preparing, besides putting in the work, you know, that's really what it comes down to. It's just, you know, the more you put in, I don't know anybody who has been dedicated and craft to finding a job. And just remember, finding a job is a full-time job. So you have to put in the work, you have to do it, and you'll be prepared. And so again, I can keep going on what I would recommend, but I'll leave it at that, and good luck.
So with that last little piece of imparting advice that it takes a lot of work to get work, I'm very grateful to each of you and to the pioneers who joined us today. Upon exiting this webinar, you will be prompted to complete a survey for this event. So please take a moment to provide us some feedback on if this event was useful to you and how we can make it better. Continuous improvement is very important to us at Cal State East Bay, and without your honest opinion, it's harder for us to make sure that we're putting on events that are helpful to you, our pioneer community. You also have the opportunity to click the link for our upcoming events where you can register for the next Career Boost webinar. And in the meantime, I'd also like to invite you for one of our upcoming events, such as Pioneer Game Nights, which takes place every Thursday evening. Explore ways to volunteer, such as serving on future panels. And of course, to follow us via our social media channels for announcements about upcoming events and opportunities. As I had mentioned earlier, I'd appreciate it if our panelists are able to stick around to type out any answers to the remaining questions. But of course, I also understand if you have on behalf of the Alumni Association and Cal State East Bay, I wish you all a wonderful evening.